I'm Emily Wood. This is the marsh grass cardigan, and today I'm going to be talking about how I created the buttonholes for this button band. Remember that buttonhole methods are interchangeable, so if there's a method you prefer, then by all means use that method. I like this type of buttonhole for a couple reasons. It makes a very nice, tidy, snug buttonhole that's not going to stretch out over time. And I also like it because you create the buttonholes all in one row. So there are some methods where you would bind off stitches on one row and then cast back stitches on the following row. But with this buttonhole, you do it all in one row. Remember that for any type of buttonhole that you use, you want to make sure that your button, whatever size it is, just fits through the buttonhole, because over time, your button bands might stretch out. You want to make sure that those buttons are not going to work their way through the fabric. To demonstrate how I made my buttonholes, I have my little tiny swatch here that's in the ribbing pattern that I used for the button bands. I've worked the first handful of stitches in pattern. The number of stitches that you work before you make a buttonhole is going to differ depending on what size of cardigan you're making. But that doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter whether you start with a knit stitch or a purl stitch when you make this type of buttonhole. So I've worked the first few stitches. I bring the yarn to the front of the work and slip that first stitch, bring the yarn to the back. That makes a little loop that's going to prevent a hole from forming at the edge of the buttonhole. I slip one stitch, pass that stitch over to bind it off. I'm going to do that 4 times, bind off 4 stitches. So I bound off 4 stitches, and my working yarn, as you can see, is still over here on the right side of the buttonhole. So I'm going to slip this stitch over to the left-hand needle to put it on hold for a while and turn the work. So now I've bound off one side of the buttonhole. I'm going to be casting on stitches to make the other side of the buttonhole using the cable cast on method. Remember, you insert your needle through that hole between those 2 stitches. Wrap the yarn around the needle and pull a loop through, and then put that loop, that new stitch, on your left-hand needle. Then insert your needle into that same hole, make a new stitch. I'm going to cast on 4 stitches using this method. 4. And then I'm going to cast on 1 more stitch, but this time before I put it onto the left-hand needle, I'm going to bring the yarn to the front. So I've cast on 5 stitches, which is 1 more than I've bound off on the bottom of this buttonhole. I turn the work, slip that first stitch on the left-hand needle to the right-hand needle, and then bind off that last cast on stitch. Again, to kind of hold everything together. That is the end of the buttonhole, the first buttonhole. So you work in pattern however many stitches that it's called for. It depends on the size of the cardigan that you're making. So I'll demonstrate the buttonhole one more time. I reach the point where I need to make a new buttonhole, bring the yarn to the front, slip 1 stitch, bring the yarn to the back, slip 1, pass the stitch over 4 times, Return that stitch to the left-hand needle. Rotate your work and cast on the other side of your buttonhole using the cable cast on. Oops. And you're casting on one more stitch, then you bound off. But remember, for the last stitch, you bring the yarn to the front, or you pass that stitch over, or you put the stitch on the needle. Okay. Then you rotate your work back to this side, slip that stitch, and bind off one more stitch to kind of hold everything together, and continue knitting in pattern. As you're working back across on the next wrong side row, you're going to come to those cast on stitches, and you just work them in pattern. You continue in your 1 by 1 rib. So you knit, purl, going to knit that one, purl, knit. So you work back across, and those are your 2 completed buttonholes.